Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of incense smoke, guitar strings and bare feet on warm summer grass. We're talking about what it actually felt like to be a hippie in 1960s America. Not the version you see flattened onto a poster or squeezed into a single grainy photograph, but the slow, lived-in version. The one with dust on your sandals and songs stuck in your head, and a whole generation trying to figure out what kind of life was worth building. Before we drift in, thank you to the viewer who suggested this one. You always send me the gentlest, most curious ideas, and this video would not exist without you. If you are enjoying these evenings together, a quiet like or a comment means more than you know, and it helps this little channel keep going. And if you would rather listen than watch, we're also on Spotify now, so feel free to find us there for the next one. Now go ahead and get comfortable. Dim the lights if you have not already. Turn on a fan or crack a window, whatever gives you that soft, steady hush in the background. Settle into your blanket. There is nowhere else you need to be tonight, because we are about to wander through a world where flower crowns replace neckties, where living rooms turned into meeting halls, where a folk song on the radio could feel like a letter from a friend. What did it actually feel like to wake up in a house full of people who were not your family, but felt like it anyway? What did a Sunday afternoon smell like in a commune kitchen? What did it feel like to sit in a crowded field with thousands of strangers, all quietly hoping for the same thing? Did the incense really cover the smell of wood smoke? Or did the two just learn to live together? What did the evening news look like through the eyes of someone who had stopped trusting it? And just like that, it is 1968. Somewhere down the street, a screen door creaks open. A record needle drops onto a worn groove. The morning air smells like patchouli and someone else's coffee. And the day, whatever it decides to become, is only just beginning. Let's start with the morning. You open your eyes to a ceiling that is not the one you grew up under. Maybe it is a shared house with a dozen mismatched mattresses on the floor, or a converted barn with light leaking in through the cracks in the wood. Somewhere nearby, someone is already awake, quietly strumming a guitar that has not been tuned in days, and somehow it still sounds right. The air smells like last night's incense mixed with the coffee, percolating in the kitchen down the hall, and it takes you a moment to remember whose turn it was to make it. You sit up slowly, the blanket sliding off your shoulders, and for a second you just listen. There is no alarm clock here. There is no schedule taped to a refrigerator. Just the soft murmur of other people's mornings happening around you, close enough to feel like company, loose enough to feel like freedom. You stay still a while longer, watching the dust drift through the one thin beam of sunlight that has found its way through the curtains. Somewhere below you, a floorboard creaks under someone's bare feet, and a screen door swings open with its familiar tired hinge. You can hear the low murmur of a conversation that started before you woke up, and will probably still be going when you finally make it downstairs. Nobody rushes you here. There is no clock on the wall that anyone actually checks, and if there were, it is likely a few minutes slow anyway. The kind of thing nobody bothers fixing because it has never really mattered. The mattress beneath you is thin, borrowed from someone who borrowed it from someone else before that, and the sheet is a soft, faded floral pattern that has been through more washes than anyone can count. You run a hand through your hair, unbothered by how it looks, because there is nobody here keeping score of that sort of thing. A housemate pokes their head through the doorway, offers a sleepy good morning, and disappears again without waiting for a reply. It is the kind of morning greeting that asks for nothing back. Eventually you swing your legs over the side of the mattress and sit for a moment, feeling the cool wood floor under your feet. The room around you is cluttered in a comfortable way. Clothes draped over the backs of chairs, A stack of records leaning against the wall, a candle burned down to a small stub on the windowsill. None of it is arranged with any particular care, and somehow that makes it feel more like a home than any tidy room ever could. You pull on yesterday's shirt because today does not seem like the kind of day that requires anything fresh. Downstairs, the kitchen is just beginning to stir. Someone is filling a kettle at the sink. Someone else is leaning against the counter with their eyes still half closed, waiting for the coffee the way people wait for good news. You slide into a chair at the table, the wood worn smooth from years of elbows and mismatched mugs. Nobody asks what your plans are for the day because plans in a house like this tend to reveal themselves slowly, over the course of the morning, rather than being decided all at once. Outside the kitchen window, the yard is just beginning to wake up too. A cat stretches on the porch railing, unbothered by the people stepping around it. A wind chime someone made from old spoons clinks softly against the side of the house, and somewhere further off, a rooster that does not belong to anyone in particular announces the morning to whoever might be listening. You watch it all through the window glass, still half inside your own thoughts, still carrying the quiet of sleep with you into the day. The coffee, when it finally comes, is strong and a little bitter, poured into a mug with a chip on the rim that nobody has thrown away because it still holds liquid just fine. You wrap both hands around it and let the warmth settle into your palms. Someone slides a plate of toast toward the middle of the table, and it disappears in pieces, passed from hand to hand without anyone claiming ownership of it. Conversation starts slowly, in fragments, someone mentioning a dream they had, someone else mentioning a letter they need to write, and none of it feels urgent. It simply unfolds, the way mornings here always seem to. It is the kind of morning that would be hard to explain to someone who has never lived it, this loose, unstructured beginning to a day that has nowhere in particular it needs to go. There is no rush to get dressed, no rush to be useful, no rush to prove anything to anyone. Just the quiet company of people who happen to end up under the same roof, drifting slowly toward whatever the day decides to become, together. And maybe that is the part that is easiest to forget about mornings like this one, decades later, looking back. It was not really about having nothing to do. It was about choosing deliberately to let the day begin gently, without anyone telling you how fast it should move. You finish your coffee, set the mug in the sink for whoever's turn it is to wash it, and step out onto the porch where the sun has climbed just high enough to warm the wood beneath your feet. The day is still wide open. Nobody has decided yet what it will become, and for now that uncertainty feels less like a problem to solve and more like a door left open, waiting to see who might walk through it. It is mid-morning now, and getting dressed is less of a routine and more of a small act of self-expression. You pull on a pair of bell-bottoms that someone else wore first, patched at the knee with a scrap of fabric that does not quite match. Your shirt is soft from 100 washes, the collar loose, the sleeves a little too long, and you like it that way. There is a string of beads hanging on a nail by the window, and you loop it over your head without thinking twice. Somewhere in another room, someone is braiding a friend's hair, weaving in a ribbon or a small wildflower picked from the yard. Nobody has checked in a mirror for very long. The point is not to look put together. The point is to look like yourself, whatever that happens to mean today. It is the kind of freedom that is harder to imagine now, when so much of getting dressed still starts with checking what everyone else is wearing. You dig through a wooden crate in the corner that serves as a shared closet, pulling out a vest someone stitched together from an old army jacket. The buttons replaced with mismatched ones scavenge from a sewing tin. It smells faintly of cedar and someone else's cologne, and you put it on anyway, because in this house, clothes belong to whoever needs them that day. A friend tosses you a headband threaded with a small feather, and you tie it on without much thought, the way you might grab an umbrella on your way out the door. Nobody here dresses for anyone watching. There is no mirror mounted on the wall, just a small hand mirror passed between whoever needs it, propped against a windowsill for a moment before someone else claims it. You catch a glimpse of yourself in it, hair a little wild, shirt a little loose, and you decide it will do. It always does. Outside, the morning light catches the patchwork of colours scattered across the porch, mismatched fabrics drying on a line, a pair of sandals left out from the night before. Someone walks by barefoot, unbothered by the gravel path, humming something under their breath. You slip your feet into a pair of moccasins that may or may not be yours and step outside to join them. There is something quietly rebellious about all of it, though nobody talks about it that way. Dressing like this is not really about fashion. It is about shedding the version of yourself that was expected to look a certain way, to dress for approval, to fit into a mould handed down by someone else. Out here, the clothes are borrowed, the styles are improvised, and the only real rule is that it should feel like you. Someone comes around the side of the house carrying a basket of clean laundry, still warm from the line, and sets it down on the porch steps for whoever needs something. You dig through it and find a shirt dyed in soft swirls of blue and purple, the kind made by twisting fabric tight with rubber bands and dipping it in a bucket in the backyard the week before. You pull it on over your undershirt, the fabric still holding a faint trace of vinegar from the dye, and it feels like wearing a small piece of the whole household's effort. A few housemates sit cross-legged on the porch, stringing more beads, weaving them into long necklaces that will end up around someone's neck by the end of the week, whether they made it or not. You sit down beside them for a moment, threading a few beads of your own onto a length of cord, not because you need another necklace, but because your hands like having something to do while the conversation drifts from one topic to the next. Someone mentions they are thinking of cutting their hair shorter. Someone else says they have not cut theirs in over a year and has no plans to start now. Nobody argues about it. It is simply another small personal decision made without needing anyone else's approval. By the time you're fully dressed and out on the porch, the sun has climbed a little higher and the day has taken on its own shape. You lean against the railing, the beads around your neck catching the light, and watch the yard slowly come to life with people in clothes as unmatched and unhurried as your own. Somewhere, a friend is fixing the strap on a sandal with a bit of twine. Somewhere else, someone is trying on a jacket that clearly belongs to someone twice their size, and laughing about it rather than caring. It is the kind of morning ritual that asks for nothing more than honesty, and somehow that is enough. You catch your reflection once more in a window pane as you step off the porch, and for the first time in a long while, the person looking back feels entirely unmistakably like you. By now, there is almost always music playing somewhere in the house. It might come from a record player with a needle that skips in the same spot every time, or from a radio balanced on a windowsill, its antenna bent into a shape that somehow gets the best reception. You do not always sit and listen on purpose. It just fills the space the way sunlight does, drifting through open doors, mixing with the sound of someone doing dishes or talking quietly on the porch. A new song comes on, one you have not heard before, and the whole room seems to lean toward it without moving. Someone hums along even though they do not know the words yet. Music here is not something you put on in the background of your day. It is something closer to a shared language, a way of saying things that felt too big or too tender to say out loud any other way. You settle onto a cushion near the record player, watching the needle ride the slow spiral toward the centre of the record. The sleeve leans against the wall nearby, its cover a little worn at the corners from being handled so often, passed from house to house, borrowed and returned and borrowed again. Someone across the room closes their eyes, moving their head slightly with the rhythm, not quite dancing, just letting the sound settle into their body the way warmth settles into a cold room. Every house seems to have its own particular relationship with music. In this one, it is less about performance and more about presence. Someone picks up a guitar that has been leaning against the wall all morning and plays a few chords, not really starting a song, just filling a pause in conversation the way someone else might fill it with a sigh or a laugh. A housemate taps along on the side of a wooden crate, turning it into a drum without anyone deciding that was the plan. It is loose, unrehearsed, and somehow it never quite falls apart. You think about how different this feels from music back home, where it mostly lived inside a living room console, listened to quietly after dinner, chosen carefully to avoid anything too loud or too strange. Here, the music arrives from everywhere at once, and nobody worries about whether it is appropriate or whether the neighbours can hear. A song that talks about war, or love, or simply about being lost gets played again and again until everyone in the house has absorbed it, half by memory and half by feeling. In the afternoon, someone puts on a record that has clearly been played hundreds of times, the surface hissing faintly beneath the melody, and the whole room goes quiet in a way that feels less like silence and more like attention. A friend mouths the words without quite singing them out loud. Someone else stares out the window, caught somewhere between the song and their own thoughts. It strikes you, sitting there, how much of what this whole way of living seems to be built on gets said through songs rather than conversation. Things too complicated to explain directly, feelings too large for ordinary words, all folded neatly into a few minutes of melody that everyone in the room somehow already understands. Later, someone changes the record, and the mood in the room shifts along with it, a slower song giving way to something with more energy, more insistence. A few people get up and start to move, not in any particular pattern, just swaying and stepping in whatever way the song seems to be asking for. You find yourself tapping a foot against the floor without quite deciding to. It is contagious in a way that feels less like excitement and more like agreement, everyone quietly saying yes to the same rhythm at the same time. By early evening, the music has softened again, someone plucking out a slow melody on the guitar while the light through the windows turns gold and then grey. Conversations continue underneath it, quieter now, punctuated by pauses where everyone just listens for a moment before picking the thread back up. It occurs to you that this is one of the few places where music never really stops, where it is less an event you plan for and more a constant low hum running underneath everything else that happens in a day. Decades from now, certain songs will still carry the smell of this house, the particular slant of this afternoon light, the feeling of belonging somewhere without needing to explain why. It is close to midday, and the kitchen is doing what it always does around this hour, slowly filling with people who drift in one at a time, drawn by the smell of something simmering on the stove. There is no single cook today. Someone chops vegetables from a garden that is more hopeful than orderly. Someone else stirs a pot of beans that has been going since morning, and someone hums while kneading a lump of bread dough that will not rise quite right, but nobody minds. The table is a mismatched collection of chairs and crates, and there is always room for one more, even when there should not be. Meals here are not quiet. They are loud, with plans half formed and stories half true, and everyone eats a little slower than they need to because there is nowhere else anyone is trying to be. It is the kind of shared table that is rare to find now, where the cooking and the company matter more than the schedule. You lean against the counter, watching the pot bubble slowly, the steam carrying the smell of onions and something earthy you cannot quite place. Someone hands you a wooden spoon without asking if you want to help, and you find yourself stirring almost automatically, falling into the rhythm of a kitchen that operates less like a chore and more like a shared project everyone contributes to without being asked twice. A jar of spices, unlabelled, gets passed around the room, each person adding a pinch based on memory rather than measurement. The bread dough gets punched down and reshaped by whoever happens to be standing near it, and it becomes something of a communal task, one person kneading for a while before handing it off to someone else with flour-dusted hands. Nobody worries about it turning out perfectly. The last loaf came out dense and a little burnt on one side, and everyone ate it anyway, laughing about the parts that had gone slightly wrong. There is a comfort in that, in food that does not need to be flawless to be worth sharing. As the meal comes together, more people wander in, drawn by the smell more than any actual announcement that it's time to eat. Someone brings in a basket of tomatoes still warm from sitting in the sun, and someone else produces a jar of pickled something from the pantry that nobody quite remembers making. The table fills with mismatched plates, some ceramic, some tin, a couple of jars serving as cups because there are not quite enough glasses to go around. Nobody minds. The point was never really about matching dishware. Once everyone is seated, or as seated as a table this crowded allows, the meal becomes less about the food itself, and more about the conversation that spills out around it. Someone recounts a trip into town that turned into an unexpected adventure. Someone else complains gently about a broken bicycle chain, already plotting how to fix it with parts scavenged from an old one in the shed. The beans, when they finally reach your bowl, are simple, a little smoky, seasoned by whoever got to the pot last, and you eat slowly, letting the conversation wash over you as much as the meal itself. There is a specific kind of intimacy that comes from cooking and eating like this, elbow to elbow with people who were strangers not so long ago, sharing food that nobody paid for individually and nobody claims sole credit for making. It teaches you, without anyone explicitly saying so, that a meal can be an act of trust as much as an act of nourishment. You notice how naturally people offer their plate to share a bite of something, how easily seconds get passed down the table without anyone needing to ask twice. By the time the meal winds down, the kitchen is slowly emptied out again, plates rinsed in a shared basin, leftovers covered loosely with cloth for whoever gets hungry later. Someone remains behind, scrubbing pot, humming quietly to themselves, and you linger a moment longer than you need to, in no hurry to leave a room that has, once again, made you feel like you belong somewhere larger than yourself. It occurs to you that meals like this one will be some of the hardest things to explain later to people who never sat at a table quite like it, crowded with strangers who slowly, meal by meal, stopped being strangers at all. The afternoon settles into something slower. Someone is out on the porch stringing beads onto a length of thread, letting the colours fall wherever they land. Someone else has a guitar across their lap, not really playing a song, just picking out the same few notes over and over until they finally sound right. A few people are painting a mural on the side of the house, bright swirling colours that will probably need touching up by next summer, but that does not stop anyone today. There is a quiet kind of pride in making something yourself instead of buying it finished. A hand-sewn patch on a jacket, a tie-dyed shirt hung out to dry on a line strung between two trees. It is not about being perfect. It is about spending an afternoon with your hands busy and your mind quiet, something that feels increasingly rare the further we get from days like this one. You find a spot in the shade near the mural project, watching as someone dips a brush into a jar of homemade paint, thinned with something that gives it a slightly uneven texture on the wood. The colours run together in places, and instead of fixing it, the painter simply leans into the blur, letting one shade bleed softly into the next. A younger housemate sits nearby, carefully outlining a sun with a shaky but determined hand, unbothered by the fact that it does not look quite symmetrical. Nobody critiques the work too harshly here. The point of the mural was never to look professional. It was to mark the house as theirs, in colours nobody else would have chosen quite the same way. Further down the porch, the beadwork continues, threads of colour slowly becoming necklaces, bracelets, small ornaments to hang near a window. Someone shows you a simple pattern, and you try your hand at it, fingers clumsy at first, threading beads in the wrong order more than once before finding a rhythm. It is slow work, repetitive in a way that feels almost meditative. Each small bead, a tiny decision made without much consequence if it turns out wrong. You lose track of time slightly, absorbed in the small, steady motion of it. The guitar player nearby finally lands on the right combination of notes and breaks into something recognizable, a slow tune that a few people quietly hum along to without looking up from what they're doing. It becomes a kind of soundtrack to the whole afternoon, not loud enough to demand attention, just present enough to colour the mood. Someone else brings out a basket of scrap fabric and starts cutting shapes for a patch, meant for a jacket sleeve that has worn through at the elbow. They hold it up for a moment, considering the size before threading a needle and beginning to stitch it into place with slow, deliberate movements. There is very little talk about outcomes in an afternoon like this. Nobody asks what the mural is supposed to represent exactly, or what the beaded necklace is for. The work exists mostly for the sake of the working, for the particular satisfaction of watching raw material slowly become something with shape and colour, and a little bit of intention behind it. You think, briefly, about how different this feels from buying something already finished, something with no fingerprints on it, no evidence of the hours someone spent getting it slightly wrong before getting it right. As the afternoon wears on, the light shifts, casting long shadows across the yard, and the mural catches a warmer tone as the sun angles lower. The beaded thread in your hands has grown into something resembling a bracelet, uneven in places, but yours in every sense that matters. Someone steps back to admire the mural as a whole, hands on hips, nodding slowly, satisfied in the particular way that only comes from making something with people you care about. Nobody says it needs finishing today. It will still be there tomorrow, waiting for whoever feels like picking up a brush again. For now, the afternoon has done exactly what it was meant to do, filled itself gently with colour, thread, and quiet, patient hands. By evening, the conversation in the house often turns to something heavier. Someone has a brother overseas, or a cousin who got a draft notice last week, and the mood in the room shifts the way it does when something too big to fully hold enters the space, voices lower. Somebody lights a cigarette just to have something to do with their hands. You listen more than you talk, taking in opinions that do not always agree with each other, but nobody raises their voice, not really. There is a shared sense that something needs to change, even if nobody in the room agrees on exactly what that looks like. A folded newspaper sits in the middle of the table, its headline already a day old, and someone taps it gently, like it is a living thing they're trying not to wake. These conversations do not solve anything by the time they end, but they matter anyway, because saying it out loud is its own kind of small courage. The kitchen light hangs low over the table, casting a warm circle that does not quite reach the corners of the room, where a couple of housemates sit half in shadow, listening more than speaking. Someone mentions a friend who left for basic training only a few weeks ago. Someone else brings up a rally they heard about happening in the city, and the conversation moves back and forth between grief and determination, without ever quite settling on either one. A pot of tea sits mostly untouched in the middle of the table, growing cold as everyone forgets about it in favour of the conversation. You notice how carefully some people choose their words here, aware that everyone at this table has a different personal stake in what is happening thousands of miles away. Someone's brother writes letters home that arrive weeks late, full of details that never quite match what gets reported on the news. Someone else has decided, quietly and firmly, that they will not go if their name gets called, and the room holds that decision without judgment, even from those who are not sure they agree with it. Nobody at this table claims to have the whole answer. What they share instead is the belief that silence is no longer an option. The newspaper in the middle of the table gets picked up eventually, unfolded, and read aloud in pieces. A headline here, a paragraph there, met with sighs or headshakes or occasional short laughs that carry no real humour in them. Someone points out a photograph accompanying one of the articles, and the table goes quiet for a moment, taking it in. It is one thing to hear about a war through a headline. It is another to imagine someone you love standing somewhere in the middle of it. As the evening deepens, the conversation eventually softens at the edges, moving from the war itself toward what people plan to do about it, letters to write, marches to attend, pamphlets someone offers to help print in the coming week. There is a kind of energy that builds during conversations like this, not loud or aggressive, but steady, the sense of people slowly working themselves toward action rather than simply venting frustration into the room and letting it dissipate. Someone brings up a song they heard on the radio earlier that week, one that seemed to be speaking directly to everything being discussed at the table, and for a moment the mood lightens slightly, comforted by the reminder that plenty of others outside this house feel the same way. The tea, cold by now, finally gets poured out and replaced with something stronger, passed carefully around the table in shared cups. By the time the conversation winds down, it is late. The kitchen light casting longer shadows, the newspaper folded again and set aside for tomorrow. Nobody has solved anything tonight, not really. But something has shifted slightly in the room, a quiet resolve settling over the group that was not quite there before. You sit for a moment longer after most people have drifted off to bed, thinking about how strange it is that a kitchen table, of all places, has become one of the few spaces where this kind of honesty is even possible. As the sky darkens, the day tends to end the same way, gathered around a fire pit in the yard, the flames catching the faces of people you've known for years and people you met just last week. Someone always has a guitar, and someone always knows the words to a song that everyone else slowly learns by the second chorus. The smoke drifts upward into a sky thick with stars. You never quite get used to seeing this clearly. Somebody passes around a blanket to share. Somebody else tells a story that gets a little more exaggerated each time they tell it, and nobody minds. There is a comfort in these fires that is hard to describe, a sense that for a few hours nothing outside this circle of light matters quite as much. It is the kind of closeness that feels almost old-fashioned now, sitting shoulder to shoulder with people, no screens, nothing but firelight and voices. You settle onto a log someone dragged close to the fire, the heat pressing warmly against your knees while the night air cools everything else. Sparks drift upward whenever someone tosses another piece of wood onto the flames, disappearing somewhere into the dark before they ever reach the stars. The guitar player finishes one song and pauses to retune a string that has been drifting flat all evening, and in that small silence you can hear crickets, and somewhere further off, the faint bark of a dog that does not belong to anyone here. Someone new to the circle, a friend of a friend passing through for a few days, gets asked gently to share where they are from, and the story that follows meanders in the unhurried way that stories tend to around a fire like this, full of small tangents nobody bothers cutting short. The group listens closely, offering the occasional laugh or quiet nod, welcoming a stranger into the circle with nothing more than attention and an offered seat. The blanket makes its way from one set of shoulders to the next, passed without much discussion, simply noticed and shared whenever someone starts to shiver. A few people lean back to look up at the sky, tracing constellations they only half remember the names of, arguing gently over which star belongs to which shape. Someone claims to have seen a shooting star a moment ago, and half the circle looks up too late, laughing about it rather than feeling as though they missed something important. As the fire burns lower, the conversation slows along with it, drifting from lighter topics into something quieter and more reflective. Someone mentions how strange it is to think that a year ago, Most of the people sitting around this fire did not know each other at all, and now it is hard to imagine a week going by without seeing these same faces. Nobody responds right away, letting the thoughts settle over the group the way the last of the smoke settles over the yard. The guitar starts up again, softer this time, a slow song that does not ask anyone to sing along, just to sit and listen if they want to. A couple of people close their eyes, letting the melody carry them somewhere quieter inside themselves. The fire crackles, popping every so often, sending up another small burst of sparks that catches everyone's attention for just a moment before fading back into the dark. Eventually, one by one, people start to peel away from the circle, saying quiet goodnights, wandering back toward the house or toward tents pitched further out in the yard. The fire gets left to burn down slowly, tended by whoever remains until it is safe enough to leave. You linger a little longer than most, staring into the last of the embers, thinking about how nights like this one manage to feel both completely ordinary and quietly significant at the same time. Another small, unremarkable evening that somehow, looking back, will end up mattering more than it seemed to while it was happening. Every so often, word travels that something bigger is happening, a gathering a few towns over, or further, where people are coming from all directions to be in one field together. Getting ready for it feels different than getting ready for anything else. You pack light, a blanket, some food to share, maybe a harmonica tucked into your bag just in case. The drive there is long, crammed into a van with more people than seats, windows down, music drifting out into the wind. As you get closer, you start to see other cars headed the same direction, other people walking along the road with the same loose, hopeful look on their faces. There's a feeling that builds the closer you get, a sense that you're about to be part of something larger than any one person could explain, even if you are not entirely sure yet what that something is. The morning of departure starts early, the house buzzing with a different kind of energy than usual. Everyone gathering supplies, checking the van's tyres, arguing lightly over whose turn it is to sit up front. Someone loads a cooler with whatever food the kitchen can spare, mostly bread, cheese, a jar of preserves someone made last month. Another person ties a stack of blankets to the roof rack with rope that looks more hopeful than secure, and everyone piles in around it, some sitting on laps, some perched on the edge of the bench seat, nobody minding the tight fit. The drive itself becomes its own small adventure, the radio catching and losing signal as you move through unfamiliar towns, someone occasionally singing to fill the static when the station fades out completely. Every so often, someone spots another car packed just as full, headed the same direction, and a hand waves out the window, met by an answering wave from the other car, two groups of strangers acknowledging that they are, for the moment, part of the same unlikely migration. As the miles pass, conversation in the van shifts between excitement and nerves, someone wondering aloud how many people will actually show up, someone else recounting rumours they heard about who might be playing, though nobody's entirely sure any of it is true. You watch the landscape shift outside the window, towns giving way to open fields, the road narrowing the closer you get to wherever this gathering's actually happening. The first sign that you're near comes not from any marker or sign, but from the sheer number of cars parked along the roadside, doors open, people spilling out with their own blankets and coolers, already forming small clusters even before reaching the main gathering point. You feel the van slow to a crawl in the traffic, and someone in the back cranes their neck out the window, trying to catch the first glimpse of the crowd ahead. By the time you finally park, wherever a spot can be found, the walk toward the field feels almost ceremonial, everyone carrying their share of the supplies, weaving through a growing river of people all headed the same direction. Strangers greet each other along the way, sharing water, offering directions, comparing notes on how far they travelled to be here. Someone in your group starts humming a tune, and a few strangers walking nearby pick it up too, until it becomes something like a small, unplanned chorus moving together down the road. As the field finally comes into view, wide and already dotted with clusters of people settling into spots on the grass, something in the air shifts, a mixture of anticipation and disbelief at just how many people actually came. You adjust the blanket under your arm, glance at the friends who travelled with you, and step forward into the crowd, aware that whatever happens over the next few days, it will be unlike anything you have been part of before. And then you're there, standing in a field with more people than you have ever seen in one place, all facing the same direction, toward a stage that looks impossibly small from where you stand. The music rolls out over the crowd like weather, and for a moment thousands of strangers move together without anyone telling them to. Someone next to you offers a piece of bread from their bag without being asked. Someone else is dancing with their eyes closed, lost somewhere the rest of you cannot quite follow. The grass is worn thin beneath your feet. The air smells like sunscreen and wood smoke and rain that might be coming later, and none of it seems to matter as much as the song currently playing. It is easy, standing there, to believe that a crowd this large, all wanting the same soft, simple things, might actually be able to change something. You find a spot to settle in, close enough to feel part of things, far enough back to still see the wider crowd stretching out in every direction. The blanket gets spread out on the grass, already flattened from the people who stood there before you, and you sit down alongside your friends, sharing the last of the bread and cheese brought from home. Around you, strangers introduce themselves without much formality, trading names and hometowns as easily as they trade sips of water from a shared canteen. The music shifts from one act to the next throughout the day, each performer met with the same wide, rolling wave of applause and movement from the crowd. During the quieter songs, thousands of people fall into a hush all at once, swaying gently, some with their eyes closed, some staring up toward a sky that keeps threatening rain without quite delivering it. During the louder ones, the whole field seems to lift slightly, people rising to their feet, dancing in whatever loose, unstructured way the music calls for. Somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, a light rain finally does begin to fall, and rather than sending people running for cover, it becomes its own kind of celebration. People lifting their faces to it, laughing, some pulling off their shoes to feel the mud between their toes. You watch the field transform in real time, grass giving way to soft earth, and nobody seems particularly bothered by it. If anything, the rain seems to bring the crowd even closer together, huddled beneath shared blankets and ponchos, passing around whatever dry clothing anyone still has left. As evening approaches, the mood shifts again, softer now, the crowd settling back down onto the damp grass as the light changes colour across the sky. Someone nearby lights a small fire in a makeshift pit, and a few strangers gather around it, sharing food, sharing stories, becoming familiar to each other in the space of just a few hours. You find yourself deep in conversation with someone you'd never met that morning, discussing everything from music to the war to what you each hope the next few years might look like. The kind of conversation that would feel unusual anywhere else, but here feels entirely natural. By the time night fully settles over the field, the stage lights cutting through the darkness in slow sweeps of colour, you look around at the sea of people surrounding you, still swaying, still singing along to songs that seem to speak for everyone at once. It occurs to you, sitting there in the mud and the noise and the quiet moments in between, that this is not really about the music alone. It is about proving to yourselves, if only for a weekend, that this many people, wanting the same simple things, peace, honesty, a little more kindness in the world, can actually exist together, unafraid, in one open field. By the time night falls again, whether you're back at the house or still out in that field far from home, the day tends to end the same quiet way. You lie back, the ground firm beneath a thin blanket, the sound of a guitar fading somewhere in the distance as people slowly drift off one by one. The stars overhead feel closer out here, away from streetlights, away from anything trying to hurry you along. You think about the conversations from earlier, the songs, the strangers who did not feel like strangers by the end of the day. There is uncertainty ahead, more than you would like to admit, about the war, about money, about whether any of this will last the way you hope it will. But tonight, none of that presses too hard. Tonight there is only the fire dying down to embers, the quiet hum of people you have come to care about, and a sky wide enough to hold whatever comes next. You shift slightly on the blanket, trying to find a comfortable position on ground that is never quite as soft as it looks, and pull your jacket a little tighter against the cool night air. Somewhere nearby, someone is still talking in low tones, their voice blending with the occasional pop of the dying fire and the distant echo of music from another part of the field that has not quite wound down for the night. You listen without really trying to make out the words, the sound itself enough to keep you company. Above you, the sky stretches out in a way that still catches you off guard every time, thick with more stars than you ever remember seeing back home, where porch lights and street lamps always seem to wash out anything fainter than the brightest view. Someone nearby points out a satellite moving slowly across the sky, a tiny, steady light among all the scattered, unmoving ones, and a few heads turn to follow it until it disappears past the tree line. Your mind drifts, unhurried, over the events of the day, the walk in, the music, the rain, the strangers who by nightfall had become something closer to friends. You think about the letter you should probably write home soon, one that would try, and likely fail, to explain any of this in a way that would make sense to people who are not here. Some things, you're starting to realise, simply do not translate well onto paper. They have to be lived to be understood. The fire nearby crackles one last time before settling into a steady, low glow, and someone tosses on a final piece of wood, more out of habit than any real need for more warmth. A blanket gets past your way, and you accept it gratefully, spreading it over your legs while keeping your eyes on the sky. Somewhere further off, a lone voice starts humming a familiar tune, low and unhurried, not really performing for anyone, just filling the quiet with something gentle. You think briefly about tomorrow, about packing up, about the long drive home and whatever waits for you there. But those thoughts do not stay long tonight. They drift in and drift back out, the way distant thoughts tend to when the body is tired enough and the company is comfortable enough to let them go. Your eyes grow heavier, the stars blurring slightly at the edges, and the voices around you soften into something more like background music than conversation. Eventually, sleep comes the way it always seems to out here, without much resistance, without the need for anything more than a thin blanket and the sound of people you trust settling in nearby. The last thing you register before drifting off completely is the sky itself, vast and unfamiliar and somehow comforting all at once, holding you the way it holds everyone else scattered across this field tonight, all of you dreaming, for now, under the very same stars. Let's move to the driveway, where an old van sits with its doors open, half of its original paint already sanded away. Someone has a coffee can full of leftover paint scavenged from a hardware store bin, colours that were never meant to go together but somehow will by the time the afternoon ends. A brush gets passed from hand to hand, each person adding a swirl, a flower, a word that meant something to them that week. Nobody's trying to make it look professional. The van is less a vehicle and more a moving diary, one that will keep changing every time someone gets bored enough to add another layer of colour on top of the last. You crouch near the back bumper, dipping a smaller brush into a jar of deep blue, and add a wave along the lower edge of the door where the metal has started to rust through in one corner. Someone nearby has drawn a sun with too many rays, each one a slightly different length, and rather than fixing it, They simply keep adding more until the whole thing looks less like a sun and more like something exploding gently outward. Nobody minds the lack of symmetry. If anything, it feels more honest this way, closer to how the day itself is unfolding. The paint fumes mix with the smell of the driveway asphalt warming under the afternoon sun, and every so often someone steps back to squint at the van as a whole, offering an opinion nobody asked for but everyone welcomes anyway. A housemate paints a single word along the side panel, something simple, something that clearly meant a great deal to them that particular week, and does not explain it further when someone asks. Some things apparently are meant to stay a little bit private, even out here in the open with a paintbrush in hand. Someone finds an old rag to wipe their hands on, already stained in 6 different colours from helping with earlier sections, and passes the coffee can of green over to a friend who's been waiting patiently for a turn. The side mirror, somehow, ends up painted entirely gold, though nobody quite remembers deciding that. A stray cat wanders close, sniffing curiously at the paint cans before deciding none of it looks edible, and wandering off again, unbothered by the chaos happening a few feet away. By mid-afternoon, the van has become something closer to a quilt than a vehicle, patches of colour overlapping in places where 2 people worked without checking with each other first. Someone laughs about how they will never be able to sell this thing for scrap now, not that anyone had planned to. The van was always meant to carry people from one gathering to the next, and somewhere along the way it also became a canvas for whatever the house was feeling that particular season. A few housemates step back entirely, sitting on the porch steps with cold glasses of water, admiring the progress from a distance. From here, the mismatched colours start to look almost intentional, a wild, layered pattern that no single person could have planned, but that somehow works as a whole. Someone jokes that the van looks like it drove straight out of somebody's dream, and nobody argues with the comparison. As the light starts to shift toward evening, the paint on most of the van has dried enough to touch without smudging, though a few spots along the hood remain tacky, marked off with a stick propped nearby as a makeshift warning. You wipe your hands one final time and step back to take in the whole thing. Doors, hood, bumper, all of it covered now in colour that didn't exist there this morning. It occurs to you that the van will probably need another coat added within a month or 2, once someone gets restless again, once another idea takes hold that needs somewhere to go. For now, though, it sits in the driveway exactly as it should, imperfect, unfinished in the best possible way, ready to carry whoever needs carrying to wherever they need to go next. It is early afternoon, and a small group heads into town for supplies, piling into the van with its still-drying paint. The main street looks the same as it always has, brick storefronts, a diner with a faded sign, but the reception you get walking down it has changed over the past year or so. Some people smile, some cross the street a little early. An older man in front of the hardware store watches you pass without saying anything, his expression somewhere between curiosity and quiet disapproval. You do not let it slow your steps, though you notice it all the same. The van rolls to a stop along the curb, still smelling faintly of fresh paint, and a few heads turn as everyone piles out one by one. A young boy on the sidewalk stares openly at the mismatched colours covering the doors, tugging his mother's sleeve to point it out, and she offers a tight, polite smile before steering him gently toward the crosswalk. You catch the eye of a shopkeeper sweeping the sidewalk in front of his store, and he gives a small nod, more neutral than anything else, the kind of acknowledgement that asks nothing and offers nothing beyond simple recognition that you exist. Inside the general store, the shelves are stocked the same way they always have been. Canned goods, sacks of flour, a cooler humming quietly in the back corner. The woman behind the counter rings up your items without much conversation, her eyes flicking briefly toward the beads around your neck before returning to the register. It is not unkind, exactly, just careful. the way people sometimes are around something they have not quite decided how to feel about yet. Outside again, walking further down the street, a group of teenagers lean against a parked car, watching you pass with a mixture of curiosity and something closer to admiration. One of them lifts a hand in an easy wave and you return it, feeling the small, quiet victory of being seen kindly by someone who might, in a year or two, end up somewhere just like the house you came from. Not everyone reacts the same way, and you have stopped expecting them to. Further along, an older woman crosses paths with your group outside the diner, and rather than looking away, she stops entirely, studying the embroidered patch on someone's jacket with open interest. She asks who made it, and when someone answers proudly that they did, she nods slowly, says it is fine work, and continues on her way without another word. It is a small moment, easy to miss, but it stays with you longer than the stares that came before it. By the time the errands are finished, arms full of bags, the walk back to the van feels different than the walk into town did. Less like moving through a place that was assessing you, and more like moving through a place that, whether it likes it or not, is slowly getting used to you being part of its scenery. The van waits at the curb exactly where you left it, its wild colours looking a little less out of place against the ordinary backdrop of Main Street than they did an hour ago. As the group climbs back in, someone jokes about the look on the hardware store owner's face when he first spotted the van rolling past, and the whole group laughs, not unkindly, more out of recognition than mockery. The drive back toward home passes quieter than the ride in, everyone a little tired from the small invisible effort of being looked at all afternoon, but not unhappy about it. Being noticed, you're starting to realise, is simply part of what it means to live the way you've chosen to live, and most days that feels like a fair enough trade. The back corner of the property has slowly turned into a garden, rows of vegetables planted a little unevenly by people who mostly learned as they went. You kneel down to pull a few stubborn weeds from around a row of tomato plants, the soil cool and damp beneath your fingers. Someone nearby explains, with more confidence than actual experience, why marigolds are supposed to keep certain bugs away, and nobody bothers checking if it is true. The garden will not feed the house entirely, not yet, but there is a quiet satisfaction in watching something grow that you planted with your own hands. The sun sits high overhead, warming the back of your neck as you work your way down the row, tossing weeds into a growing pile beside you. A few rows over, someone waters a patch of beans with a watering can that leaks slightly from a crack near the handle, the leak forming a small dark patch in the dirt that nobody bothers fixing. The garden was never planned out with much precision, rows drifting slightly crooked, plants spaced closer together in some places than others, but everything seems to be growing anyway, stubbornly, the way things tend to when given enough sun and enough attention. Someone calls out from further down the garden, holding up a tomato that has finally started to blush red at one end, and a small round of applause follows, half joking, half genuinely proud. It is easy to forget, sitting here with dirt under your fingernails, that not long ago none of you had grown anything more complicated than a windowsill herb. There is a particular kind of pride that comes from coaxing food out of the ground yourselves, one that feels entirely different from simply buying vegetables at a stand in town. A housemate crouches beside you, showing you how to check the underside of the leaves for small pests before they spread further, tilting a leaf gently with 2 fingers to reveal a scattering of tiny insects clinging to the underside. You're not entirely sure the remedy they suggest, a diluted spray made from crushed garlic and water, will actually work, but you help mix it anyway, straining the mixture through a piece of old cloth before pouring it into a jar. As the afternoon wears on, the garden slowly becomes a gathering point, people wandering over on their way to somewhere else and staying longer than they intended, drawn in by the simple, steady work of pulling weeds, or checking on a row of carrots that still has weeks left before it will be ready. Someone brings out a jug of water for everyone to share, and you take a long drink, the coolness a welcome relief against the warmth of the afternoon sun. By the time the light starts to soften into early evening, the row of tomato plants looks noticeably tidier than it did that morning. Weeds cleared, stakes straightened, a few ripe fruits carefully picked and set aside in a basket for tonight's dinner. You sit back on your heels, surveying the small stretch of garden with a satisfaction that feels entirely disproportionate to the size of the plot, but earned all the same. It occurs to you that a year ago, you could not have named half the plants growing in these rows, and now you know which ones need shade, which ones need more water, which ones will need to be picked before the first frost arrives. It is a small kind of knowledge, but it feels like it belongs to you now, learned slowly one afternoon like this one at a time. The mail arrives a little after noon, dropped off at the end of the long driveway, and someone walks down to collect it, sorting through a handful of envelopes on the way back. One letter is addressed to you, your mother's familiar handwriting on the front, and you find a quiet corner of the porch to read it. Her words are careful, a little worried, asking when you might come home for a visit. You fold the letter back into its envelope slowly, feeling the pull between two entirely different worlds, both of which, in their own way, still feel like yours. You sit with the envelope in your lap for a while before opening it again, running a thumb along the worn edge where it was folded and refolded during its journey here. Her handwriting slants slightly to the right, the same careful cursive she used on birthday cards and school permission slips, and something about seeing it again brings back a wave of memories you had not expected. The smell of her kitchen, the sound of the radio she always kept on low in the evenings, the particular way she used to check on you before bed. The letter itself is gentle, more worried than angry, asking simple questions about whether you're eating enough, whether you're safe, whether the people you are living with are kind to you. She mentions that your father does not say much about it, but that he asks after you more than he lets on. There is a line near the end that catches in your throat a little, where she writes that the house feels quieter without you, followed immediately by a small, almost apologetic note that she does not mean to make you feel guilty, only that she misses you plainly and simply. You sit with that for a long moment, watching a few housemates moving around the yard in the distance, laughing about something you cannot quite hear from here. It strikes you how strange it is to feel two kinds of homesickness at once. Missing the family you grew up with even while sitting in a place that has slowly, without you quite noticing, become another kind of home entirely. Neither feeling cancels the other one out. They simply sit together, a little uncomfortably, the way two true things sometimes do. A friend passes by and notices the letter still open in your lap, pausing to ask gently if everything's all right. You nod, and after a moment you find yourself telling them a little about your mother, about the kitchen radio, about the version of yourself that existed before any of this. They listen without offering advice, simply sitting beside you for a while, letting the moment be what it is rather than trying to fix it. By the time the afternoon light starts to shift, you have decided quietly that you will write back tonight, promising a visit sometime soon, even if you're not entirely sure yet when that will actually be possible. You tuck the letter carefully into your bag, planning to keep it, the way you have started keeping small things lately, a pressed flower, a ticket stub from the last gathering, evidence of a life you suspect you will want to remember clearly later, long after this particular season has quietly come to an end. Not every evening ends in easy agreement. Tonight, a disagreement breaks out over how the household chores have been split. Someone feeling like they have been doing more than their share, someone else insisting the work has always been fair. Voices rise slightly before someone suggests taking a breath and starting over. It is a small reminder that living like this, close and communal, does not erase people's differences, it just asks everyone to work through them a little more openly than they might have back home. The argument starts small, over something as ordinary as a stack of unwashed dishes left in the sink for 2 days running, but it quickly widens into something bigger, touching on who has been pulling their weight around the house and who has quietly been letting others pick up the slack. Voices that are usually easygoing take on a sharper edge, and for a moment, the warm, loose atmosphere that usually fills this kitchen feels tight and uncomfortable instead. Someone crosses their arms, insisting they have been doing plenty, just not the kind of work that gets noticed as easily. Tending the garden instead of scrubbing pots, fixing the fence instead of sweeping floors. Another housemate counters that unseen work does not put clean dishes on the table, and the exchange goes back and forth a few more times before someone finally suggests, a little wearily, that shouting about it is not going to solve anything. The room settles slightly, though the tension does not disappear entirely. Someone pulls out a scrap of paper and a pencil, suggesting, half joking and half serious, that maybe a proper list needs to be made this time, chores divided clearly enough that nobody can argue later about who agreed to what. A few people groan at the idea of anything so structured in a house that is mostly run on trust and good faith, but nobody has a better solution to offer in the moment. You watch the whole exchange from your seat at the table, aware of how easy it would be to assume that a house like this, built on shared ideals and mutual care, would somehow be immune to the ordinary friction of people living closely together. It is not. If anything, it makes the friction more visible, since there is no landlord or parent to appeal to, no external authority to settle the dispute, just each other, working it out slowly, sometimes clumsily, in real time. Eventually, the sharper edges of the conversation start to soften, someone offering a half apology, someone else admitting they have been more tired and short-tempered than usual lately for reasons that have little to do with dishes at all. A rough list gets sketched out on the scrap of paper, more of a loose guideline than a strict rule, and everyone seems willing enough to try it, at least for now. By the time the kitchen empties out for the night, the argument has cooled into something closer to understanding, imperfect and little unresolved but honest. You think, watching the last few people drift off toward bed, that this is probably closer to the truth of living together than any of the songs or slogans ever quite capture, that building something different from what you grew up with does not mean disagreements disappear, only that you have to find new, more patient ways of moving through them together. The kitchen radio crackles to life with the evening news, and the room slowly quiets as a report comes on about a protest that turned tense a few states away. Someone turns up the volume, and everyone leans in slightly, trying to catch every word through the static. The report ends and moves on to something else entirely, a commercial for laundry soap jarring in its ordinariness. Someone reaches over and turns the radio off, and for a moment the kitchen sits in a silence heavier than before the news came on. The announcer's voice, calm and practiced, describes the scene in clipped, careful sentences, numbers of people involved, a brief mention of arrests, a short quote from a local official that sounds rehearsed even through the static. Nobody in the kitchen says anything while it plays, all attention fixed on the small speaker, as though staring at it might somehow clarify the details further. A housemate leans against the counter, arms crossed, jaw tight, clearly recognizing the name of the city being mentioned. When the segment ends and slides seamlessly into an advertisement, the shift feels almost disrespectful. The same calm, cheerful tone used to sell soap now filling the space where the report on the protest just was. Someone mutters something under their breath about how strange it is that the two can exist back to back on the same broadcast, as if nothing particularly significant just happened at all. The radio gets switched off, and the silence that follows feels different from the usual quiet of this kitchen, heavier, more aware of itself. Someone finally speaks, voice quieter than usual, wondering aloud whether anyone they know might have been there. A few names get mentioned, friends of friends who mentioned plans to attend something similar recently, and the uncertainty of not knowing settles uncomfortably over the room. Someone suggests trying to call a nearby payphone booth that a friend sometimes uses, though nobody's confident it will actually connect to anyone useful. The mood in the kitchen shifts noticeably, the earlier warmth of the evening replaced by something more solemn. A pot of tea gets made, more out of habit than any real desire for it, and cups get passed around slowly, everyone needing something to hold on to while they sit with the news. Someone brings up the letters that keep arriving from friends who have gone further into activism than most of the house has, wondering quietly whether the risks they are taking are starting to escalate faster than any of you expected. Eventually the conversation moves towards smaller, more manageable questions. Whether to attend the next planned demonstration in town, whether it makes more sense to write letters instead, whether staying informed from a distance is its own kind of quiet cowardice or simply a different way of contributing. Nobody reaches a firm conclusion, but the questions themselves feel important to ask out loud, rather than letting them sit unspoken beneath the surface of an otherwise ordinary evening. By the time everyone starts drifting off to bed, the radio remains switched off, sitting quietly on the counter where it will likely stay until morning. You lie awake a little longer than usual that night, turning the report over in your mind, aware that somewhere out there, people your age are facing consequences far heavier than anything happening inside this quiet, comfortable kitchen, and wondering, not for the first time, how much longer this particular kind of comfort can reasonably last. A new arrival showed up last night with little more than a backpack and a name, and today someone takes it upon themselves to show her around, explaining without ever quite stating it as a rule, how things work here. Whoever cooks does not have to clean. Whoever is up first puts on the coffee. Doors are rarely locked, and privacy is more of a suggestion than an expectation. She nods along, taking it all in, and by the end of the walk she already looks a little more at ease, like she has started to understand that this house runs less on rules and more on trust. The tour starts in the kitchen, where the unofficial guide points out which cupboard holds the shared food and which small shelf in the corner belongs to anyone who wants to keep something private, an unspoken agreement respected without needing to be enforced. The new arrival listens carefully, occasionally asking a clarifying question, like whether there is a schedule for laundry, and gets a small laugh in response, along with an explanation that scheduling tends to work itself out naturally, more or less. Moving through the house, she is shown the room where extra mattresses get stored for whenever more people arrive than the house technically has beds for, and the closet that serves as a shared wardrobe, where clothes rotate freely between whoever needs them on a given day. She hesitates slightly at that part, clearly unused to the idea of sharing clothing so openly, but does not object, simply filing the information away along with everything else. Outside, the tour continues past the garden, the fire pit, the van still drying from its latest coat of paint, each stop accompanied by a small story, who planted which row of vegetables, who painted which section of the van, small pieces of the house's shared history offered casually without much ceremony. She asks quiet, thoughtful questions along the way, clearly trying to understand not just the physical layout of the place, but the deeper logic holding it all together. By early afternoon, she is introduced properly to the rest of the household, gathered loosely on the porch, and the conversation flows easily, people asking where she came from, what brought her here, and she answers honestly, mentioning a difficult situation back home that made staying there feel impossible. Nobody presses for more detail than she offers freely, respecting the same quiet privacy that was explained to her only an hour earlier. As the day winds down, she helps prepare dinner alongside a couple of housemates, still a little unsure of where everything is kept but increasingly comfortable asking rather than assuming. Someone hands her a knife and a cutting board without much explanation, trusting that she will figure out the rest, and she does, slicing vegetables a little unevenly but competently enough that nobody feels the need to correct her. By the time everyone gathers for the evening meal, she is seated comfortably among the group, already laughing at an inside joke someone has quickly explained to her, already looking less like a stranger and more like someone who simply arrived a little later than the rest of you. You watch her settle in, remembering your own first days here, how strange and unfamiliar it all felt at first, and how quickly, almost without noticing, it stopped feeling strange at all. Rain keeps everyone inside today, and instead of feeling like a loss, it becomes its own kind of gathering. Someone pulls a worn paperback from a shelf and begins reading aloud, voice low and steady, while the rest of the room settles into whatever comfortable position they can find, some lying on the floor, some curled into an armchair shared by two people at once. The story is not particularly important. What matters is the sound of a familiar voice filling the room, and the rain against the windows keeping time in the background. You find a spot near the window, close enough to hear every word, watching the rain streak steadily down the glass while the reader's voice rises and falls with the rhythm of the sentences. The book itself is battered, its spine cracked from being passed around and read from so many times, pages slightly warped from an earlier spill of tea nobody quite remembers now. Nobody minds the imperfections. If anything, they add to the sense that this particular copy belongs to the whole house, rather than to any one person. As the story unfolds, occasional comments drift through the room, someone laughing softly at a particular line, someone else murmuring agreement with something the narrator says, small interruptions that never quite break the rhythm of the reading. The reader pauses occasionally to take a sip of tea, and in those brief silences the sound of rain against the windows fills the gap comfortably, never feeling like an empty pause at all. A couple of housemates doze off partway through, lulled by the steady voice and the grey, unhurried light filtering in from outside. Nobody wakes them. The reading continues regardless, quieter now, almost like a lullaby rather than a story being told for anyone's particular benefit. You find your own eyes growing heavy at points, though you fight it, wanting to stay present for whatever happens next in the story, even as the details start to blur pleasantly at the edges. Eventually, the reader's voice grows a little hoarse, and someone else volunteers to take over, picking up exactly where the last person left off without missing much of a beat. The transition happens smoothly, almost unconsciously, the way certain households seem to absorb small changes without any real disruption. The new reader has a slightly different rhythm, pausing in different places, emphasizing different words, and the story takes on a subtly different flavour because of it, though nobody seems to mind the shift. Outside, the rain shows no signs of letting up, grey and steady against the window glass, turning the yard beyond into a soft blur of green and brown. Someone gets up to light a couple of candles as the afternoon light continues to dim, and the room takes on a warmer, cosier feeling despite the persistent chill seeping in from outside. Tea gets refreshed, blankets get redistributed, and the reading continues on, unhurried, exactly as long as everyone in the room seems to want it to. By the time the story reaches a natural pause, the rain outside has softened into something closer to a mist, and the room stretches slowly awake again. People sitting up, stretching, blinking against the candlelight. Nobody rushes to leave the moment behind. Instead, conversation drifts easily out of the story itself, discussing what everyone thinks will happen next, whether the characters made the right choices, small debates that stretch comfortably into the evening, born entirely out of an afternoon that could easily have felt wasted had it not been spent exactly like this. By late afternoon, a housemate who has been talking about leaving for weeks finally packs their bag for good, headed toward a city a few states away in search of something none of you can quite name. The goodbye at the end of the driveway is warm but a little heavy, hugs held slightly longer than usual, promises made to write that everyone hopes will actually be kept. You watch the car disappear down the road, feeling the strange mix of happiness for them and quiet loss for yourself, a reminder that nothing about this life is as permanent as it sometimes feels. The packing itself happens slowly over the course of the morning, a few belongings folded carefully into a worn duffel bag, a couple of records set aside as gifts for whoever wanted them, since there was no room to bring everything along. You watched from the doorway as they sorted through a small box of trinkets collected over the past several months, deciding what mattered enough to keep and what could be left behind for the next person who might need it more. By the time the bag sat zipped and ready by the front door, the whole house had gathered loosely in the front room, offering small parting gifts of their own. A hand-knitted scarf someone had been working on for weeks, a jar of preserves from the garden, a folded piece of paper with an address scrawled on it in case anyone ever found themselves passing through that part of the country. Nobody made a large ceremony out of it, but the care behind each small gift spoke plainly enough. At the driveway, the goodbyes stretched out longer than they probably needed to, everyone finding one more thing to say, one more joke to share, one more quiet moment to hold on to before the car actually pulled away. A younger housemate, the newest arrival from just a few days ago, hung back a little, unsure of her place in a goodbye this significant, until the departing friend pulled her into the circle too, insisting that she was already part of it, even after so short a time. You found yourself holding the goodbye a beat longer than most, remembering quiet conversations shared over the kitchen table, late nights around the fire, small kindnesses that built up slowly into something that felt a lot like family. There was no promise that this particular friendship would survive the distance, the different cities, the different lives that would likely follow. But there was also no real fear in the goodbye either. Just an honest acknowledgement that some chapters end, even the good ones, and that this simply happened to be one of them. As the car finally pulled out onto the main road, a hand extended out the window in a last wave. Everyone standing in the driveway waved back, some more emphatically than others, until the car disappeared around the bend and the dust settled back down onto the gravel. The group lingered a little longer than necessary, nobody quite ready to turn back toward the house and the ordinary rhythm of the afternoon. Walking back up the driveway together, the conversation turned soft and reflective, people sharing small memories of the friend who had just left, laughing gently at some of them, growing quiet at others. It occurred to you, more clearly than it had before, that this house was never meant to hold the same people forever, that its real purpose was closer to a way station, a place people passed through on their way toward whatever they were still trying to figure out, carrying a little bit of this place with them wherever they ended up next. Later in the evening, sitting alone on the porch steps, a quieter thought creeps in, one you do not say out loud to anyone. You wonder whether any of this, the music, the marches, the shared meals, will actually change anything at all, or whether it will simply be remembered later as a strange, colourful season that came and went. The doubt does not stay long. Someone calls your name from inside, pulling you back into the noise and warmth of the house, but for a moment it lingered long enough to remind you that even here, uncertainty has its own quiet seat at the table. The porch light behind you casts a soft yellow glow across the steps, while the yard beyond fades into deep shadow, the fire pit dark and cold at this hour, the mural on the side of the house barely visible except for a faint outline where the paint catches what little light remains. You sit with your elbows resting on your knees, turning the doubt over slowly in your mind, unwilling yet to dismiss it entirely, unwilling also to let it fully take hold. You think about the marches you've attended, these songs sung around countless fires just like the one sitting cold in front of you now, the letters written and mailed with such conviction, and wonder honestly whether any of it adds up to something lasting, or whether it simply feels good in the moment, a temporary release rather than a genuine shift in anything larger than yourselves. It is not a comfortable thought, and you do not entirely welcome it, but it feels important to sit with anyway, rather than pushing it away too quickly. From inside the house, laughter spills out through the open window, someone telling a story that clearly has the rest of the room hooked, and you listen to the sound of it for a moment before returning to your own thoughts. There is something almost embarrassing about doubting all of this while everyone else inside seems so certain, so wrapped up in the belief that what you are building here matters in some larger, lasting way. You wonder if they have these same quiet doubts too, tucked away, unspoken, saved for moments exactly like this one, alone on a porch step at the end of a long day. A cricket starts up somewhere nearby, joined a moment later by another, the two of them filling the silence with a steady overlapping rhythm that feels oddly comforting. You look up at the sky, still thick with stars despite the porch light nearby, and try to imagine yourself decades from now, looking back on this exact moment, wondering what you will have decided by then about whether any of it mattered. The screen door creaks open behind you, and a housemate steps out, noticing you sitting alone and settling down on the step beside you without asking why. They do not press you to explain what you're thinking about, simply sitting quietly for a while, letting the crickets and the distant laughter from inside fill the space between you. Eventually you find yourself talking a little, admitting the doubt out loud for the first time, and rather than trying to argue you out of it, they simply nod, admitting they have wondered the very same thing more than once. By the time you both head back inside, the doubt has not fully disappeared, but it feels lighter somehow, less like a private burden, and more like a shared, ordinary part of what all of you are doing out here together. The warmth of the house pulls you back in. The noise, the colour, the music starting up again somewhere down the hall, and you let it wrap back around you, doubt and all, understanding that maybe belief and uncertainty were never meant to cancel each other out, only to sit quietly side by side, the way they seem to everywhere else in this life you have chosen. The living room floor is covered in poster board and jars of paint, everyone gathered to prepare for a march happening in the city tomorrow. Someone carefully paints a single word in bold letters, another person sketches a simple dove, wings outstretched, still slightly wet with paint by the time it gets propped against the wall to dry. Conversation stays lighter than you might expect, given what tomorrow will actually involve, but underneath the easy jokes, there is a shared seriousness settling into the room, everyone quietly aware of what it will mean to carry these signs out into public tomorrow. You kneel over your own piece of poster board, brush in hand, trying to decide what single message feels worth carrying through the streets tomorrow. Around you, half-finished signs lean against the couch, the coffee table, the legs of an old armchair, each one drying at its own pace, the paint pooling slightly thicker in some letters than others. Someone has run out of black paint and is improvising with charcoal instead, smudging the edges of their lettering in a way that somehow looks more urgent for being a little rough. The record player spins something low in the corner, filling the room with a steady rhythm that nobody is really dancing to, just letting it hum along underneath the quieter work of painting and cutting and taping. A housemate carefully attaches a wooden dowel to the back of a finished sign with a strip of cloth tape, testing its weight before setting it aside with the others. Another person practices holding theirs up at arm's length, checking whether the words will actually be readable from a distance, adjusting the size of the lettering when someone points out that the second line is too small. Conversation drifts between practical matters, whether to wear comfortable shoes tomorrow, whether the weather report calling for rain will hold, and quieter, more serious threads. What to do if things get tense, where to meet if the group gets separated in the crowd. Someone brings up a story they heard about a march in another city that turned unexpectedly rough, and the room goes quiet for a moment before someone gently steers the conversation back toward the task at hand, unwilling to let fear take over the evening entirely. You notice how differently everyone approaches their sign, some choosing simple, direct words, others opting for images instead. A peace symbol, a broken rifle, a single sun rising over jagged lines meant to represent mountains, or perhaps something else entirely. Nobody critiques anyone else's choice. There's an unspoken understanding that everyone is bringing their own particular way of saying the same underlying thing, and that the variety only makes the eventual crowd of signs more powerful, not less. As the evening deepens, more finished signs accumulate along the wall, drying in a loose row, paint glistening faintly under the lamplight. Someone brings out a plate of crackers and cheese, passed around without much ceremony, everyone eating with paint-stained fingers, unconcerned about a little colour transferring onto the food. The mood remains warm, even as the weight of tomorrow settles more firmly over the room with each passing hour. By the time most of the signs are finished and set carefully out of the way to dry overnight, the living room has taken on the appearance of a small, makeshift gallery, message after message leaning quietly against the walls, waiting for morning. You look over your own sign one last time before turning in for the night, the paint just barely dry enough to touch, and feel a small, steady resolve settle into your chest, different from nervousness, closer to readiness for whatever tomorrow decides to bring. Morning arrives early, and the group piles into the van, signs propped carefully between knees, and heads toward the city centre, where a crowd is already gathering by the time you arrive. Chants rise up from different corners of the group, some in unison, some slightly out of sync, blending into a wide, uneven wave of sound. You hold your sign a little higher than you expected to, feeling both nervous and strangely certain, standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers who, for today at least, all want exactly the same thing. The van rolls slowly through streets already thick with people, some walking in loose clusters, others standing along the curb, watching the growing crowd with curious or wary expressions. You climb out near the edge of the gathering, sign held carefully against your chest to keep the paint from smudging against your jacket, and immediately feel the particular energy of the crowd settle over you, a mixture of nervous excitement and quiet determination that seems to be radiating from every direction at once. Someone near the front of your group raises their sign first, and within moments, the rest of you follow, lifting your own signs into the morning air, the words and images catching the light as more and more people around you do the same. A chant starts somewhere toward the middle of the crowd, uneven at first, gaining strength as more voices join in, until it rolls outward in waves that reach even the edges where you're standing. You find yourself joining in without quite deciding to, the words feeling less like something you are performing, and more like something rising naturally out of you. The crowd continues to swell as the morning goes on, filling the street from curb to curb, spilling into side streets and doorways where people watch from a cautious distance. A line of police stands along one edge of the gathering, expressions unreadable beneath their caps, and you feel a flicker of nervousness pass through the group nearest you, quickly steadied by someone nearby who reminds everyone quietly to stay close together and stay calm. Somewhere in the middle of the crowd, a small band strikes up an impromptu song, drums improvised from overturned buckets, a guitar slung over someone's shoulder as they play and march at the same time. The song spreads outward the same way the chants did earlier, picked up by voices who may not know all the words but hum along anyway, adding their own small thread to the larger sound the crowd is making together. You catch glimpses of familiar faces from your own house scattered throughout the crowd, someone waving from a few rows ahead, someone else deep in conversation with a stranger who has fallen into step beside them. It strikes you how quickly a crowd this size manages to feel less like a mass of strangers and more like a single sprawling body, moving together, breathing together, refusing collectively to stay quiet about the things weighing on all of you individually. By early afternoon, the march reaches its planned endpoint outside a government building, and the chants slowly give way to a series of speeches delivered from a makeshift platform, voices carried by a bullhorn that crackles every so often with feedback. You stand toward the back of the crowd now, arms tired from holding your sign aloft for hours, but you do not lower it. Not yet, watching the sea of signs stretching out around you and feeling, for the first time in a long while, something close to hope that all of this noise, all of this colour, might actually be heard by someone who matters. The drive back from the city is much quieter than the drive there. Everyone in the van a little hoarse from chanting, a little tired in a way that feels earned rather than draining. Someone leans their head against the window, eyes closed, while someone else stares out at the passing fields, replaying the day's events in their mind. Nobody says much, but the silence does not feel empty. It feels full, the kind of quiet that comes after doing something that mattered, even if nobody's entirely sure yet what it will lead to. The signs sit propped against the back seats now, a little worse for wear after a full day of being carried through the crowd. Corners bent, paint slightly faded from the sun. You glance at yours resting near your knee, the words a little smudged where your fingers gripped it too tightly during one of the louder chants, and decide you will keep it anyway, propped somewhere in your room as a reminder of today, rather than tucked away and forgotten. Outside the window, the city slowly gives way to open road, buildings thinning out into fields and scattered farmhouses, the noise and energy of the march fading behind you with each passing mile. Someone in the front seat finally breaks the silence, asking quietly whether anyone thinks the speeches at the end actually reach the people they were meant to reach, and the question hangs in the van for a while before someone offers a tired, thoughtful answer, admitting they're not sure, but that showing up still felt like the right thing to do regardless. The van's radio stays off for most of the ride, nobody quite in the mood for music yet, content instead with the low hum of the engine and the occasional soft murmur of conversation. You watch the fields blur past, gold and green under the late afternoon sun, and find your mind replaying small moments from the day. A stranger's hand steadying your shoulder in the crush of the crowd, the sound of the impromptu drum circle rolling through the street, the particular way the whole crowd seemed to inhale together before a chant began. Someone passes around a bag of crackers, the last of the snacks pack that morning, and everyone eats quietly, grateful for something in their stomachs after a long day spent mostly standing and shouting. A housemate near the back finally breaks into a soft laugh, recalling a moment when someone's sign nearly toppled onto a police officer's boot, and the story makes its way slowly through the van, drawing tired, appreciative chuckles from everyone who hears it. As the sun begins to dip lower, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, the mood in the van shifts gently from exhausted silence into something closer to quiet satisfaction. Someone finally turns the radio on low, and a familiar song fills the van, met with a few voices humming along despite how hoarse everyone still is from the day's chanting. Nobody sings with much volume. It's enough just to let the melody exist quietly alongside the tired, comfortable silence of the ride home. By the time the van finally turns down the familiar gravel driveway, the sky has darkened into deep blue, the porch light glowing warmly ahead like a small, steady beacon. Everyone climbs out slowly, muscles stiff from the long day, signs gathered carefully under arms, and makes their way toward the house without much conversation left in them. It has been a loud, long day, and now, walking toward the warm light of home, all anyone seems to want is the quiet, ordinary comfort of familiar walls and familiar faces waiting just inside. Back at the house, the mood settles into something reflective. Someone asks aloud what everyone plans to do once the summer ends, once school starts again for some, once jobs and responsibilities start pulling people back toward lives they had mostly set aside for a while. Nobody has a clear answer. Some talk about staying as long as they can. Others admit quietly that they are not sure how much longer this particular chapter will last. The conversation drifts without resolution, the way most honest conversations about the future tend to. The living room lamp casts a warm, low light over the circle of people gathered on the floor and the couch. Cups of tea passed from hand to hand as the question settles over the room. Someone mentions a letter from a university, a place they had applied to almost as an afterthought last spring, admitting they are still not sure whether they will actually go. Another housemate laughs softly, saying they never applied anywhere at all, that this house was supposed to be a pause, not a permanent decision, though it no longer feels quite that simple. You listen to the conversation drift from one person to the next, each answer a little different, a little uncertain, nobody pretending to have things figured out more than they actually do. Someone brings up the idea of travelling further west once the weather turns colder, chasing warmer places and new gatherings, while someone else quietly admits they miss their family more than they expected to, and have been thinking about a visit that might turn into something longer than planned. The record player spins something slow and contemplative in the background, matching the unhurried mood of the conversation. A few people stretch out on the floor, staring up at the ceiling as they talk, as though the answers might be easier to find looking upward rather than at each other. Someone jokes gently that maybe nobody is meant to know yet, that the whole point of a summer like this one was never about arriving at clear conclusions, only about giving everyone room to ask the questions honestly for once. You find yourself turning the question over privately as the conversation continues around you, thinking about the letter still tucked in your bag from your mother, the pull you feel toward a life that once felt like the only life available to you, and the newer pull you feel toward everything this house and this summer has taught you instead. Neither pull disappears in favour of the other. They simply sit together, unresolved, the way so much here seems to. As the evening deepens, the conversation eventually loosens from its more serious threads, drifting toward lighter memories of the summer, favourite songs discovered together, inside jokes that will probably not make sense to anyone outside this circle. Laughter returns gradually, easing the earlier heaviness without erasing it entirely. Someone suggests that whatever everyone decides to do next, tonight at least belongs to all of you together, and the room seems to agree without needing to say so out loud. By the time people start drifting off toward bed, no one has arrived at a clear plan for what comes after summer ends. But something has shifted slightly in having asked the question honestly, in having admitted uncertainty out loud rather than carrying it alone. You lie awake a while longer that night, listening to the quiet settling over the house, aware that whatever comes next, tonight's conversation will stay with you longer than any answer might have. Months later, the house feels different, quieter, a few familiar faces already gone, replaced by new ones who arrived without quite the same energy the place once had. You sit on the porch one last evening before your own departure, watching the yard in the fading light, the fire pit cold, the mural on the side of the house a little faded now from a full season of sun and rain. It occurs to you that nothing about this time was ever meant to last forever, and maybe that was always part of what made it matter. The knowledge, quiet and unspoken, that seasons like this one are borrowed, not owned, and are all the more precious for it. The porch boards creak familiarly beneath you as you shift your weight, the same worn spot you've sat in countless evenings before. Though tonight it feels different, weighted with an ending you have known was coming for weeks now. Your bag sits packed just inside the door, considerably fuller than the one you arrived with, carrying a few small trinkets picked up along the way, a beaded bracelet, a pressed flower tucked carefully into an old book, a folded scrap of poster board from a march that already feels like it happened a lifetime ago. A couple of newer housemates move through the yard below, voices unfamiliar in a way that still catches you slightly off guard, though you remind yourself gently that you must have sounded just as unfamiliar to the people who were here before you arrived. The energy they bring is not wrong, just different. A new rhythm settling into a house that has clearly seen its share of comings and goings long before you ever showed up, and will keep seeing them long after you leave. You look toward the mural on the side of the house, the colours softened now. The once bright sun faded into something gentler, blurred slightly by a season of weather nobody thought to protect it from. It still makes you smile, remembering the afternoon it was painted, the arguments over which shade of blue to use, the small, stubborn pride everyone took in something so obviously imperfect. It will likely fade further before anyone gets around to repainting it, if anyone ever does, but for now it remains exactly as it should, a marker of a particular afternoon that mattered. The fire pit sits cold and unlit tonight, nobody quite in the mood to build a fire for what everyone already knows is your last evening here. Instead, a small group gathers loosely around you on the porch steps, passing a jar of something homemade and slightly too sweet, offering quiet, unhurried company rather than any grand goodbye. Someone strums a few chords on a guitar, not really playing a full song, just filling the evening air gently the way music always seems to around here. You think about the letters you will need to write once you leave, promises to stay in touch that you genuinely intend to keep, though you know from experience now how easily distance and new chapters can loosen even the most sincere intentions. It does not make the promise feel any less worth making. If anything, knowing how uncertain it all is only makes tonight's quiet company feel more valuable, more worth holding on to carefully in memory. As the night deepens and one by one people drift back inside, you remain on the porch a while longer, alone with the quiet, the faded mural, the cold fire pit, the soft chorus of crickets that has become as familiar to you now as any sound from home. Tomorrow you will pack the last of your things into a car headed somewhere else entirely, carrying this place with you in ways you're only beginning to understand. Tonight, though, you allow yourself simply to sit here a little longer, grateful, unhurried, letting the last of this particular season settle gently over you before it finally, quietly, comes to an end. It is late morning and the car is finally loaded, the last of your belongings wedged carefully into the trunk, alongside a box of preserves someone insisted you take for the road. The house behind you looks smaller somehow, the way places always do once you have decided to leave them. The painted van still parked crookedly in the driveway, the mural on the side of the house catching the sun one final time before you pull away. You settle into the passenger seat, the window rolled down, the smell of dust and cut grass drifting in from the yard. There is no ceremony to this departure beyond the one you have already lived through the night before, just a long stretch of road ahead, and the quiet, unfamiliar feeling of not knowing exactly what waits for you at the other end of it. The engine turns over slowly, coughing once before settling into a steady rhythm, and the driver glances over with a small, tired smile before easing the car down the gravel driveway. You look back once, catching a last glimpse of the porch where you spent so many evenings, the fire pit sitting cold in the morning light, a couple of figures still waving from the steps even after the car has turned onto the main road. The wave lingers in your memory longer than it probably should. A small, ordinary gesture that somehow manages to hold an entire season inside it. The road stretches out ahead in long, unhurried curves. Farmland giving way to small towns and then back to farmland again. The radio catching stations that fade in and out with the terrain. You do not talk much at first, content simply to watch the landscape shift outside the window, replaying small fragments of the summer in your mind, a song learned around a fire, a mural half-painted in the afternoon heat, a stranger who stopped being a stranger somewhere between one shared meal and the next. None of it feels like something you can properly explain to anyone waiting for you at home, and you decide, somewhere around the second hour of driving, that you'll not try to explain all of it at once. Some of it, you suspect, is meant to stay exactly where it happened. The car stops once at a small diner along the highway, the kind of place with a chrome counter and a jukebox in the corner, and you sit for a while over a cup of coffee that tastes different from the coffee you've grown used to all summer, brewed too weak, served too fast. The waitress calls you both Hon without looking up from her notepad, and there is something oddly comforting in the ordinariness of it. A small return to a version of the world that never stopped moving the way it always has, indifferent to whatever changes you feel you've gone through over the past few months. Back on the road, the afternoon stretches longer than expected, the sun sliding lower until it catches the windshield at an angle that makes the whole world look faintly golden. You think about the letter still tucked into your bag, your mother's careful handwriting, the quiet worry folded into every line. You wonder what she will notice first when you walk through the door, whether it will be your hair or your clothes or something less visible, some shift in the way you carry yourself that even you have not fully noticed yet. By the time the car finally slows into more familiar territory, streets you recognize, a water tower you used to pass on the way to school, the light has faded into a soft blue dusk, porch lights beginning to flicker on one by one along the road. You feel the strange double pull of two places at once, gratitude for the summer behind you, and something quieter, more complicated, stirring at the thought of stepping back into a house that has not changed nearly as much as you have. The car finally turns down a driveway that feels both entirely familiar and slightly foreign, headlights sweeping briefly across a porch you grew up climbing the steps of 1,000 times before. You sit for a moment before opening the door, gathering yourself, aware that whatever comes next will require its own kind of translation, a slow, patient explanation of a summer that changed you in ways words alone may never fully capture. But for now, you simply breathe in the familiar smell of home drifting through the open window and step out of the car, carrying the whole season quietly with you into whatever comes next. Months later, the beads still hang on a nail inside your closet door, a little dustier now, the string slightly frayed at one end. You find yourself touching them sometimes without quite meaning to, the same way your fingers used to move automatically toward a guitar string or a bead thread during long, unhurried afternoons that summer. The house you live in now has proper furniture, matching dishes, a schedule taped loosely to the inside of a kitchen cabinet, and none of it feels wrong exactly, only different, quieter, in a way that took some getting used to after months of shared rooms and constant overlapping conversation. You still write letters, though less often than you promised you would, to friends scattered now across cities you had never given much thought to before that summer. Their replies arrive slowly, filled with updates that sound both familiar and slightly changed. Someone starting school after all, someone else still chasing gatherings further west, someone quietly admitting that the house itself has mostly emptied out, replaced by newer faces who never knew the particular rhythm the two of you once shared there. In the evenings now, you find yourself instinctively slowing down in small ways nobody else around you seems to notice. You linger a little longer over dinner than you used to, resisting the urge to eat quickly and move on to the next task. You catch yourself humming songs from that summer while doing ordinary chores, the tune surfacing unexpectedly while you wash dishes or fold laundry, carrying you briefly back to a kitchen crowded with people who are never in a hurry to finish a meal. Sometimes, sitting on your own porch step now in a much quieter yard than the one you left behind, you notice the sky the way you were taught to notice it that summer, without rushing to name the constellations, without needing the moment to mean anything beyond simply being present in it. It surprises you how much that small habit has stuck, this deliberate pause before moving on to whatever comes next in your day. You still think, every so often, about the doubts that crept in that one quiet evening on the porch steps, wondering whether any of it truly changed anything beyond yourselves. Looking back now, you're not entirely sure the question ever needed a clear answer. Something in you did shift that summer, a patience you did not have before, a willingness to sit with uncertainty rather than rushing to resolve it, a deeper trust in the small, ordinary kindness of people who choose, again and again, to show up for each other without being asked. The mural on that old farmhouse wall has probably faded further by now, maybe repainted entirely by whoever lives there today, and the van, if it still runs at all, likely carries someone else's colours layered over yours. It does not trouble you the way you once thought it might, this awareness that nothing from that summer was ever meant to last exactly as it was. What stayed with you instead was quieter, less visible, something closer to a way of moving through your days rather than a single object or place you could point back to. Tonight, folding laundry in a room far removed from that farmhouse bedroom, you find the same beaded bracelet you strung together on a lazy porch afternoon. A little uneven still, a few beads slightly out of order. You slip it onto your wrist without much thought, the way you might reach for something familiar and comforting on an otherwise ordinary evening. It occurs to you that this, more than anything else, may be what that whole season was truly about, not the marches, or the music, or the gatherings themselves, but the quiet, lasting habit of paying closer attention to the people and moments around you, long after the particular summer that taught you how had come and gone. The gravel driveway feels shorter than you remembered, though the trees lining it have grown taller, their branches now meeting overhead in a way that casts the whole approach in dappled shade. You slow the car instinctively, half expecting the place to look exactly as you left it, and are surprised, in a quiet, unremarkable way, by how much and how little has actually changed. The mural on the side of the house has faded further, its once bright sun now closer to a pale ghost of colour against the weathered wood, though someone has clearly added a small new detail near the corner, a cluster of stars painted in a hand you do not recognise. The van is gone, replaced by a different vehicle entirely, parked at the same crooked angle the old one always seemed to favour. You step out slowly, the familiar creak of the porch steps greeting you before anyone inside does, and for a moment you simply stand there, taking it in, aware of how strange it feels to visit a place that once felt entirely yours and now clearly belongs, just as completely, to people you've never met. The screen door swings open before you reach it, and a face you do recognise appears, older somehow, though it has only been a year, breaking into a wide, surprised smile the moment they see you standing there. The reunion unfolds easily, hugs held a beat longer than necessary, a flurry of quick, overlapping questions about where you have been and what you've been doing, answered only partially before someone else appears at the door, curious about the commotion. You are pulled inside almost immediately, into a kitchen that smells achingly familiar, coffee and wood smoke and something baking, though the faces gathered around the table are a mixture of familiar and entirely new, the house having clearly continued on its own rhythm long after your own chapter here ended. You're introduced to newer housemates who have only heard stories about you, second-hand versions of moments you actually lived, slightly exaggerated in the retelling the way stories always seem to become over time. It is a strange, warm feeling, being spoken about as though you're already a small piece of the house's history, even as you sit right there at the table, very much still part of the present moment unfolding around you. Someone asks what it has been like being back in a more ordinary kind of life, and you find yourself answering honestly, admitting that some parts have been harder to adjust to than you expected. The quiet of living somewhere without a dozen other people underfoot, the strange formality of schedules and rent payments, the small, persistent ache of missing evenings exactly like this one. Nobody seems surprised by the answer. A few nods around the table suggest they have wondered the same thing themselves, quietly, about whatever comes after their own time here eventually ends. You wander the house a little later, alone, drawn instinctively toward the room you used to sleep in, now home to a mattress and belongings that are not yours, arranged slightly differently than you remember but recognizably similar all the same. You do not linger too long, aware that this space, however meaningful it once was to you, now belongs to someone else's ordinary mornings, someone else's quiet routines. Out on the porch again as evening settles in, you sit with a couple of old friends and a couple of new faces, the fire pit crackling to life the same way it always did, the guitar making its usual rounds from lap to lap. It strikes you how easily you slip back into the rhythm of it. The unhurried conversation, the shared blanket pass without being asked for, as though no time at all has actually passed, even though so much clearly has. By the time you finally climb back into your car to leave, the stars overhead just beginning to emerge, you feel a quiet, complicated gratitude settling over you, glad the house continues on without you, glad you were once, briefly, a real part of its story, and glad too that leaving it behind allowed you to grow into whatever this next chapter has been asking of you. You pull out of the driveway slowly, watching the porch light shrink in your rearview mirror, carrying the visit with you the way you've learned to carry so much else from that summer, gently, gratefully, without needing to hold on too tightly. Years later, on a much quieter evening, you find yourself kneeling in front of a small fire pit you built yourself, in a backyard that belongs entirely to your own small family now, showing your child how to stack kindling the way you once learned from someone else's patient hands. The flames catch slowly, the way they always seem to, and your child watches with the same wide, uncertain fascination you remember feeling the very first time you sat close to a fire that was not entirely your own to tend. The guitar leaning against the porch railing nearby is yours now too, a little worn at the edges from years of use, though you still remember, distinctly, the first time you ever picked one up on a lazy summer afternoon decades ago, fumbling through the same few chords for what felt like hours before anything finally sounded right. You do not play especially well even now, but you play anyway, the way you were taught, without worrying too much about getting it perfect. Your child asks, as children often do, why you insist on cooking dinner outside so often, why the meals always seem to take longer than they probably need to, why you let them stay up later than their friends to watch the stars instead of hurrying them off to bed. You find yourself answering slowly, trying to explain something that still feels, even after all these years, a little difficult to put fully into words. You tell them, simply, that some of the best parts of being alive happen when nobody's in a rush, when a meal becomes an event instead of a task, when the sky above is allowed to be interesting instead of just something you glance at briefly on your way indoors. You think, watching your child's face lit by the fire's glow, about the summer that first taught you these things, the communal kitchen table, the slow afternoon spent making something with your hands instead of buying it already finished, the quiet, patient trust it took to build a life alongside people who started out as strangers. So much of that particular chapter has faded now, the specific faces, the specific songs, the specific arguments and doubts that once felt so urgent. But the underlying rhythm of it, the deliberate slowness, the attention paid to small, ordinary moments, has clearly stayed with you, passed down now, quietly, without much explanation, into the way you are raising your own family. Your partner comes out to join you both eventually, carrying 2 mugs of something warm, settling onto the ground beside the fire without any particular hurry. The 3 of you sit together for a while, listening to the crackle of the flames, the distant hum of crickets, your child eventually leaning tiredly against your shoulder, still watching the fire with heavy, contented eyes. You think briefly about the doubts you once had, sitting on a very different porch decades ago, wondering whether any of what you were living through would actually matter in the long run. You still do not have a clean, certain answer to that question, not really. But watching your own child now, slowly absorbing the same unhurried rhythm you once learned around a stranger's fire, you feel something close to an answer forming anyway, quiet and imperfect, the way most real answers tend to be. Eventually the fire burns low and you carry your sleepy child inside, tucking them into bed with a faint smell of wood smoke still clinging to their hair. You linger a moment in the doorway before turning off the light, thinking about how strange and quietly wonderful it is that a summer you lived through so long ago is still, in its own gentle way, shaping the small, ordinary evenings of a family that summer never even knew it was helping to create. So that is where we leave them tonight, the fires burning low, the vans painted in colours no one planned, the kitchen tables crowded with people who started out as strangers and slowly, meal by meal, became something closer to family. A garden pulled from stubborn ground, a letter folded and kept, a song hummed by someone who did not yet know all the words, small things, all of them, and yet somehow they added up to an entire way of living. Think about the people who moved through days like these, who painted murals that would fade by the following summer, who argued gently over dishes and made up just as gently, who carried signs through crowded streets, and then came home to sit quietly on a porch step, unsure of anything except that showing up had mattered. They were not trying to be remembered. They were simply trying to live honestly, alongside people they had chosen to trust. Maybe that is the part worth carrying forward tonight. Not the specific songs, or the beads, or the long hair, but the slower rhythm underneath all of it. The willingness to sit a little longer at the table, to really listen when someone speaks, to notice the ordinary textures of a day instead of rushing past them. History is not always a protest or a headline. Sometimes it is a fire pit going quiet, a screen door swinging shut, a friend passing you the last blanket without being asked. And that was enough for them. It can be enough for you too, so let the evening settle now. Let your breathing slow, the way theirs did at the end of a long full day. Wherever you are, however far from that summer porch, may you feel just for tonight a little of that same warmth. Good night. Rest well.